Morning.
Good morning. Well, we don't support Rosebank. We think the priority for the country should be transitioning away from fossil fuels, partly because of the volatility of the price of fossil fuels. And we've seen since Russia's invasion of Ukraine just what that has meant, not just for heating prices, but for electricity. Because our electricity system is matched to that gas price. So real energy security will only come from moving to nuclear, to renewables, to technologies that will insulate us from those pressures. But we have said we understand this is a difficult position for investors. We will not revoke any licences that the government choose to grant, but we don't think this is good value for money.
OK. What do you think about 125,000 ghost kids who spend more time out of school than in school? What are you going to do about that?
No, I think the figures are shocking. I think this is an incredibly significant issue. And to be frank, I worry a great deal even about my own children, who I do make sure are in school, but the impact of the pandemic on them and what it has meant for learning, and you can see in them, you can see in their development what that has meant. But part of the decisions we've already put forward around things like removing the VAT exemption for private schools and putting that money, that resource into more teachers for state schools and greater mental health support, mental health counselling for young people. I think that is the kind of priority the country needs to make sure we're doing everything we can for this generation of young people who really bore the brunt of this.
What's the plan?
Well, I think if you listening to your report you've just made, I mean, the Education Select Committee is identifying quite rightly things like the burden, the impact on young people of what has happened to them because of the pandemic, the need for better mental health support. I think that has got to be a major part of it. I think the resourcing of the state education system overall is clearly an issue as well. But we've got to be frank and say this is I hope, a once in every 100 years event that has maybe led to the particular circumstances, the numbers that we have got. And I never really quite understood why this government, given the money that had to be spent quite rightly on things like furlough, the money that was put forward by their own expert report for the catch-up support that was needed, that we backed in the Labour Party, the resources for that were a fraction, frankly, of what we'd already had to spend in the pandemic. But I think, to be frank, that moment has gone.
You mentioned the fact that you were going to put VAT on private schools straight away, actually, is what I believe, if you win the next election. The Independent Schools Council found that in a survey they carried out that 20% of parents would withdraw their children from private school if VAT was added. That would be a problem straight away. How would you accommodate those kids?
Well, quite simply, those figures aren't correct. So the best report to look at for this policy is the Institute of Fiscal Studies, who said this would raise £1.6 billion, and the transition from people in the private sector to the state sector would be somewhere between 3 and 7%. So that would take £100 to £300 million off the revenue raised, but it would still be a very clear revenue raiser. And of course, they identify themselves that private school fees have risen substantially above inflation for the last few decades. I mean, a 20% real terms rise since 2010. That hasn't produced any real impact on the figures, the enrolment figures for private schools. So I'd say that's a much more independent, authoritative report to go on. But again, on the priority, the figures you've just given for the need for resources in the state system, where the overwhelming majority of British people are educated, show just the need for this pragmatic policy to put more resources in to tackle these problems.
HS2, 5 Labour mayors meeting in Leeds today to try to convince the Prime Minister to continue on with HS2 up to the north. First of all, why Leeds, given that it's not going to Leeds now? And secondly, what makes you think that he'll take any notice? Well,
we want to see HS2 built, certainly from London to Manchester. I declare my interest as someone who lives and represents in part of Greater Manchester, but this is a network. The whole point of HS2 is not about the speed of the journey. It's to take fast services off the existing network, have better local services, and you need a network to do that. So even though you're right to say that original Y leg that would have gone to Leeds went some time ago, the overall impact, particularly on what we call Northern Powerhouse Rail, so this is the aspiration for a further high-speed rail line that would run from Liverpool all the way to Hull, that requires some of the infrastructure for HS2 to be in place. So whilst you say why Leeds, I understand that. It's still relevant to Leeds. It's still about high-speed rail getting to Leeds. But this is about the whole of the Northern network. And look, I don't know why the government has launched the kind of speculation it has. Clearly, even as someone who strongly supports this, we're going to have to see what is it they're hiding, what is it they're not telling us about the cost of this. But this is, I cannot believe as a country we cannot build a rail line between London and Manchester. I just cannot believe we don't have the capacity to do that.
Surely, is it the best use of resource?
I think the need to have a transport infrastructure project that begins before the need for it gets absolutely acute, because it takes time to build, and usually when it comes to infrastructure in this country we wait the last possible minute and don't have it when we need it, and the need to tackle what is you're one of the most unequal distributions across the different parts of England, certainly.
So you would reinstate it?
Well, I want it built. I obviously want to know what is the government hiding if they've blown a hole in the budget.
It?
Well, I've got to see if they've blown a hole in the budget, but I want to see it built to Manchester.
Would you reinstate it?
I've got to see those figures first, Kate. I mean, if they've literally blown the entire budget, I've got to see what that means. But again, I go back to that. Are we really saying as a country we don't have the wherewithal to build a railway? I just can't believe that's what we're saying.
OK, it's good to see, as always. Thanks very much, John. Thank you.